Oh, really? Okay. Okay. Cool. Thanks. Yeah. That's a nine, right? That's a nine. Oh, okay. I want to reward. Nine students? Okay. Cool. Fine. No, nine is good. No, 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 that's good. Yeah, that's good. Yeah. That's that's. Oh, 811. That's 10. Okay. 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 That's pretty good. All right. Thanks. What did they say about promoting? Oh, all right. Yeah, he wants to see it. He's not gonna try to talk. Okay. Sounds good. All right, guys. I'll see you in like 10 minutes. Then.
Good morning. Good morning. Can you see us?
Hi, can you hear us?
Yes, good morning. This is
Hi, good morning.
representative
Good
from
evening.
Seoul, South Korea. Do you see and hear us well?
I love it. Yeah. All right. Hey.
Hello.
Hi.
Spartan.
Nice
Hi.
to meet you. How are
Nice
you?
to meet you.
You as
Good.
well.
Good.
This is with
How are
our
you doing?
Bureau of Oceans, Environment, and Natural Science.
Yeah.
Office of Marine
Yeah.
Conservation.
Wonderful.
So she's
Yeah.
our
Fun job.
Yeah. It's new. I'm only been here since February, but
Cool.
yeah.
Well, congratulations.
You can leave your stuff over here or in the other room too, whatever is more comfortable.
Okay.
That's off camera.
Okay. Yeah.
I can hold on. Thank you much.
Great.
네, 안녕하세요.
I'm just gonna run upstairs and get one thing, and then Barbara is here too. She's gonna
Okay, good.
present.
Got about 35 minutes.
Perfect.
Korea is on and Fort Moresby is on.
Great.
And this will be another 15 minutes for the setup.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, you guys. Okay.
We are IIT staff.
Oh, great. Good. Yeah.
So is this where?
Hi, Ellen.
How are you guys?
Good. How are you?
Good. Nice to see you both
Nice to
again.
see you.
This is
That's
set up
where
for
the
you.
questions come in.
You're
Okay.
going to be in this space. Right now we have the video up so that people who are coming in
Have something to watch.
Right. So we're going to exchange that out, and this is where the text is going to be the questions from. Well, we don't know how many posts. We know that Korea, Port Moresby, and Wellington will be there, but we don't know how many other posts. So they can
Okay.
come from anywhere.
Okay.
But what will happen is I'll take those, unless you want to just blurt out a question, I'll take the questions and put them into the what we're calling a teleprompter.
Okay.
And so that they'll be on screen for you to read. If you see some questions that you really like, just go right ahead and take over. One of us will be over here following you word for word, so we won't lose you. You can go in any direction you want.
Okay.
And we'll try to come back to where you left off in the script.
Oh, wow. Full service. Thanks.
Well,
Yeah.
the only real read you have is the beginning. Everything else is
more
kind of
interactive.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so are you only choosing questions that are, like I've just been more involved in the Oceans Conference thing where
we haven't
everybody's
chosen any
proving
questions
things?
other than those that are already in the script.
Okay.
You mean
Yeah, I
on the
didn't know if
fly?
there had to be sort of vetting as they were coming through that you were doing over
We're
there.
hoping that you're going.
Okay. And just select appropriate questions.
Just because we put it on the screen doesn't mean you have to read.
Okay.
I just don't read it.
Okay. But anything that you put up on the screen is okay to read or not necessarily?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah. We'll let you be the final
Judge.
gatekeeper.
Okay.
You probably know more about subject than I do.
Maybe. I'm not sure. But I'll try to choose wisely.
I know that Sarah's pretty up on ocean.
Yes.
So she may know.
A bit. It's been a couple of years.
I saw this in the other
Yeah. Help yourself.
Okay. Just don't want to steal government property.
No worries.
So the literal questions just come up in here, like
Yeah.
this one is showing right here. Hi,
Yeah, this
greetings
is
everyone. Okay.
more of a conversation, but there will be questions.
Okay. Very cool. And I had some questions that I just wanted to double check with you before we start, just to make sure that I understood from the call the other day which questions you were kind of most excited about and wanted to focus on or combine. just because of the way we have the script from these guys. It looks like these were sort of just topics you had mentioned at some point.
Yeah, that was more in response to an email.
Okay.
Like, hey,
what topics do we want
yeah,
to cover?
what do you think would be
Good to
relevant?
include. Okay, and then but you liked this as sort of a starting question. The what do you see as the major challenges facing the health of our oceans today? You liked that as a starting point. And then did you have any issues with these, or ones that you were saying that you really wanted to sort of combine, or just?
Hello, American Corner, American Center in Korea. Are you there? Hello, American Center in Korea. Hello, American Center in Korea. Are you there? Hi, anybody there? Hello, American Center in Korea. Hello, hello, hello. Is anybody there? Hello, is anybody there?
Yes, we are here.
Oh, hi, how are you? Welcome
Hi,
back.
Good morning.
Good morning. Could you send us the embed code, please?
Yes, I did, and could you check your chatting,
Oh, you
box?
sent to my email? Okay, let me check. They're doing this all afternoon. They driving me crazy. They act like I do this for a living. Absolutely, yeah. We would insist that you.
Common problem. You always have too many things.
Barbara's got the sign. Nice to meet you. Go for it. Yeah, but if you better.
So deep.
Our plastic water bottle.
Yeah.
Oh.
No, Marie,
Throw
sorry.
them in the water.
Disclaimer, these bottles will be recycled.
So is it a little bit delayed?
There is a delay.
Okay.
Actually, yeah, you shouldn't. That's just for reference. You should really pay attention
Okay.
Yeah, it's
to this. You're going to hear the audio from that other speaker. Answer.
What we hear?
You'll hear it through this.
Oh, if they come in with a question?
Yeah.
Oh, great.
Only Korea
Okay.
will come through there. The other
Okay.
the other
I didn't
post,
realize they'd be
Port
live.
Moresby.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah.
They're coming in afterwards.
they're going to send questions through the chat box,
Okay.
not live. Only Korea will send questions live. And Wellington will send also in chat.
Through chat. Okay.
Can you and I maybe talk about what these questions mean?
Yes.
Curious.
Yeah.
Curious about what made you bring two keywords: sustainable and seafood connection.
Yeah.
There's obviously something that's after
Mhm.
there that is not translating.
No.
Okay.
I mean, it might just sort of be a more general, like why are you focusing on sustainable seafood? And I don't think we don't have to answer all of these questions that have already been typed up either, right?
You can answer whatever questions you want. We would ask, though, that if you ask any of the questions from the Korean students from their cooking school, that try to pronounce their name, they assure me that no matter how bad you mess it up, they're going to be very grateful.
Let's practice. So the first one,
Siwon Wang.
Siwon Wang, Siwon Huang,
Siwon Huang. Sim Young Lee. Yu Zhang Yo.
아니 오늘은 글로브 제조 소식 말고 다른 웰링턴 온라인으로 화상이 없어서 워싱턴에서 제일 좋고 다른 나라는 예술을 제가 비디오 컨퍼런스 웹에서 영어로 일하는 내용이 전달 통역을 질문을 와주셔서 감사하고요. 간단한 다과, 커피랑 과자 오른편 뒤에 준비되어 있고요. 시작은 지금 여사분은 다 준비되어 있는데 다른 나라에서 접속해야 되고 시작은 저희가 한 5분 정도 있어서 시작하도록 하겠습니다.
And what about like?
Hi, can you hear me? Hi, Korea, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you well.
Okay, good. I can hear you too. Sound great.
Would you like to use would you like us to use microphone when we have any comment questions,
Yes,
or
yes,
is it okay
please.
without microphone?
I
Can
think
you hear
we'll
us?
need the microphone.
Okay, we'll use our microphone then.
Okay.
Would you like to say good morning, hello to our students this morning?
Good morning, students. How are you? You can't see me today because I'm not on camera.
Yeah, then we can have something. Don't.
Okay, so maybe one of the questions about what.
How are you guys? How's it going?
Fine. We are online and also is on broadcast.
Okay, we're broadcasting. All right.
Yeah. We are monitoring from behind. We are monitoring our program from behind the other computer. This is
Oh,
what
okay,
they
gotcha.
see. They have different view.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay. Okay. That was fun. Are we muted too, or are we live? Are we muted?
We are online.
We're online.
We
Everything's
cannot.
okay. All right.
We cannot. So
Let's not say anything bad about our guests or Wellington or Papua New Guinea. But they're muted. We can't hear them. They're smart. Smarter than we are. Pointed at all these great students. You know, make sure all the students are. All right, sweet. Excellent. walking? By car? Aren't you guys a senior? Hey, how's it going? Far. I think. You guys have a really good question. You guys some of you heard that. Okay. Who's on they want? Sure. Yeah, you guys.
네, 마이크 써달라고. 저희가
We sent the question. Wow. Yeah. Yes, okay. Yo, Uzo. You know.
기회는 컸네.
Is it okay? Okay. Have you guys taken it? So I moved the what's it called? So that it's because I'm not when I talk to these guys, it's not part of the program. You know, it's like they're not that interested in
Great. Well, good morning and good afternoon to all of our colleagues around the world and back here in Washington. A special welcome to our viewers in Seoul and Wellington and Port Moresby. Welcome to our program. My name is Allison Fleming, and I'm here with the Department of State. I work for the Office of Marine Conservation in the Bureau of Oceans and International Environmental and Scientific Affairs. And with the help of the Bureau of International Information Program, we're happy to welcome you to this interactive speaker program. Over the next hour, you'll hear from our special guest, Barton Seaver, on topics affecting our oceans across the globe. Let me remind you that this session is being recorded and will be made available following the conclusion of this program via our archive. If you're viewing us live, we encourage everyone to take part in this conversation, and please use the chat box you'll find on your screen if you'd like to ask any questions. There will be time during our program for interactive questions and answers. So with that, our speaker today is Barton Seaver. Barton is currently director of Harvard University's Healthy and Sustainable Food Program, and he will talk about his enduring relationship with seafood and his journey from acclaimed executive chef to healthy oceans advocate. He will address how he believes chefs can help restore the ocean, talk about his passion for educating people about seafood, and he'll answer your questions on topics from fisheries to education to how what is on your plate matters to the rest of the world. So I could read Barton's lengthy resume of qualifications, but more simply, what you should know is that he possesses one of the keenest points of view on the connection between the seafood that we eat and our environment. And a conversation with him is inevitably very thought-provoking. So with that, welcome, Barton, and thank you for joining us.
Oh, I'm thrilled to be here. I'm really thrilled to have the audience all join us, and especially to the young culinary students at Sukhamjung University, Women's University. I hope I got that pronunciation right. Forgive me if I didn't, but always a pleasure to talk to young chefs and others that are passionate about the ocean. I've really come to the oceans through a very personal narrative. When I was a young boy, I got to spend a lot of my summers down on a tributary of the Chesapeake Bay, a river here near my hometown of Washington, D.C. And there I would spend my entire days fishing. I'd pull out giant crabs, and every third cast of my line, a giant fish would come back, and it was a bounty with which I was so fluent. It was such a familiar experience to me. And years on, I became a chef, and when I was writing my menus, I really realized that it was a very personal narrative, that my menu was a story about me, about my experiences and what I wanted to convey to my guests. And so I picked up the phone and I called my fish purveyor, and I said, hey, I want blue crabs, I want oysters, I want bluefish, I want all the fish that I was so familiar with as a child. And the answer that I got was, well, sorry, kid, we ate all of those. What else do you want? And it was a very startling realization that I think the guiding hand of natural selection in our world is quite firmly holding a fork. And the way that we eat largely describes how this world is used. And especially when it comes to the oceans, we've used them in inappropriate ways. We've taken too many of the fish out of the sea. Fortunately, though, the oceans are incredibly resilient. They have the ability to rebound into robust economies, into robust, resilient ecosystems that can continue to provide not only jobs, not only healthful food for us, but also to continue to provide the basic fundamental ecosystem services that we all rely on. The oceans, as many people know, 70% of our planet is covered in water. The ocean produces 50% of all of the air that we breathe. The ocean is responsible for all of our weather patterns, our climate, the rain, everything that supports life on this planet begins in the ocean. And yet we have a relationship now with the ocean that is abusive. We've created economies that are based more on volume than they are on value. And we are not utilizing the oceans for their highest and best purpose, which, to my opinion, is to enable thriving and resilient human communities. And this is the way that I really look at sustainability, is how do we use natural resources to best sustain people. And some of the issues that we face while we're trying to create these systems, for example, in the oceans we have a lot of illegal, unregulated, and underreported fisheries. It's estimated that almost 40% of all of the fish taken out of the ocean are never accounted for. And so we don't even, in some ways, know what damage we're doing to the oceans. Other issues that we have is that about 30% of all of the seafood that we catch is used for what are called reduction fisheries, meaning they're milled down, cooked into oil and to fish meal. That fish meal goes to feed pigs and chickens and farmed salmon. The oil goes into moisturizers, it goes into linoleum tiles, it goes to pharmaceuticals. And yet, that's 30% of all of the fish we're taking out of the ocean. And that fish could be better utilized to directly feed people. We live in a world where too many people are hungry, and yet one of our most abundant natural resources we're not using to feed people. And so that leads me to another sort of driver of our relationship with the ocean, which is the economics of our relationship with it. We have set up the economies of fishery to be based on volume and not on quality, not on the quality of life that they provide. Here in America, we're very fortunate. We're very blessed. We have great blessing to be able to choose what we eat. And yet, even though we have hundreds, literally hundreds of species available to us in this country, we choose to eat only 10. 10 species make up 95% of the seafood consumption in this country. And what that's created is a demand-based economy. When our recipe says cod, because cod is our favorite fish, what we then do is we demand of the oceans that it provide cod. Instead, what we should be doing is asking of the oceans what they can provide sustainably for us. When that net comes back onto the boat, sure, there might be cod in it, but pollock and haddock and hake and cusk and ling and monk and skate and dog and wolf and ray, I could go on. These are all delicious fish. Come on over to my house. I mean, I'll convince you it's the most delicious thing you've ever had. And all the students there at Sukhothai University, I'll bet you that you could do some amazing things with it as well. But the problem is we're so focused on a commodity relationship with fisheries that we forget to really explore and to celebrate the entire bounty of what the oceans can provide for us. Now, there's also a lot of hope that we have for the oceans. As I had mentioned, the ocean ecosystems are incredibly resilient. When fish stocks, meaning the populations of a given fish, are given a break from fishing, they rebound incredibly quickly. One of the examples of this is with the Gulf of Mexico oil spill that we had here just a few years back. The fishing had stopped for about a year. And when they started fishing again, there were more fish than anyone could ever remember because these species are so resilient. And so there's great hope in this if we can create economic systems, if we can create cultural expectations of what we hope to take from the ocean, that allow for these ocean ecosystems to be as resilient as they are. One other thing about seafood that most people don't understand is how important it is to the human diet. Now, I'm here talking to such an international audience. In America, we don't eat very much seafood. We eat about 15 pounds of seafood per person per year. In other countries, especially in Asia, that number jumps to almost 100 pounds of seafood per person per year. And in many parts of the world, seafood is actually, in fact, the only or the major source of protein. 2 billion people on this planet rely on the oceans solely for the majority of their food. And so when we talk about the health of fisheries, when we talk about the health of ocean ecosystems, we're really talking about the health of our human populations. We rely on the oceans to sustain us, which is precisely why we're having this conversation today about how we can all act together to sustain the oceans.
Because it's really not just an environmental problem. This is also an economic problem and a social problem and one of food security looking forward for generations.
Absolutely. You know, the oceans are really a strategic food reserve, one that continues to produce, one that really allows for us to continue to find that balance in our life between healthy economies.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think that the estimate is almost 1 in 10 people on this planet are supported either directly by a job on the ocean or a family member who is employed by a marine ecosystem.
Wow.
And
That's
so
significant.
it is very significant. But there are also some very significant threats to the ocean that are not caused by our quest for food. The greatest threat facing our oceans is actually nothing to do with seafood at all, but rather with global climate change. The acidification of the oceans is a result of increased carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. The oceans act as a sink for carbon dioxide, absorbing it from the atmosphere. And as we, through our enterprise, put so much CO2 and other greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, the ocean absorbs more of them. The more carbon dioxide in the ocean, the more acidic the water becomes. And this is a major problem because much of the food chain within the ocean is based on tiny little plankton, diatomaceous little animals, zooplankton, microscopic forms of life, plants that we never see, but form the entire basis of the food chain. Mm-hmm. Now, these plants and animals are dependent upon a very sort of particular chemistry, a very narrow band of circumstances. And when the oceans become more acidic, these tiny creatures are not able to calcify their shells to create the exoskeletons, to form literally the bones of their bodies.
And it just simply takes more energy to live.
More energy to live, and then lower lifespan, and then thus lower bioproductivity in the oceans. And so a lot of the choices that we make in all aspects of our lives, from where we get our energy from, how we use energy, how we choose to travel, mm-hmm. and especially how we choose to eat, are really all factors that impact the ocean in ways that ultimately impact human health.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so, since you've explained for us sort of how connected sustainable seafood choices are to our health and to our economy, can you tell us a little bit more about simply what does it mean to be sustainable, and what are some choices that we have across the world? This varies from location to location. What are some choices that we can make that would be more sustainable when we talk about seafood?
Sure. I think sustainable has multiple definitions, and we've really struggled, I think, as a global community to really understand what that means. Mm-hmm. The Brundtland Commission, which was a commission started by the UN to look at the global implications of declining resources, came up with a definition that resources that are used prudently today and that will be available for future generations as well. That basic principle is take only what you need and leave the rest for those who come after us. So with that basic understanding, sustainability has been pursued in many different ways. In America and in Europe, we have a lot of scientific organizations that study very particular fish stocks and the health of those species, and say, basically do sort of an economic analysis of them, saying, well, there are X number of fish. We can take Y number of fish in order for them to be healthy.
Yep.
And this is fisheries regulation, but it's also become consumer decision processes. So that is one way we define sustainable. Can that resource supply our current demand while ensuring demand in the future?
Yeah.
But sustainability means something different in other communities. There are, as I said, 2 billion people on this planet that sustain themselves solely through seafood.
Right.
So when we talk about sustainability, we have to talk about their ability to feed themselves.
So here in the U.S., and in fact you've been involved in these efforts, we have many of these different sort of guiding principles or cards or websites that consumers can use to influence their choices of what types of fish are good choices to make. If you're living in a place that does not have those same kind of cards and information and guidance readily available, what are some maybe very general principles that we could explain to our audience here that would allow them to start making sustainable choices, or to at least raise the awareness about the need for sustainable choices regarding seafood in their local communities? Are there some really general principles, like what types of food to eat, or where on the food chain are smaller fish better than bigger fish? What are some general takeaways?
Well, I think one of the most important things that we can do is to buy our seafood or to procure our seafood from sources that we know, so that we can trace that seafood. When you know where your seafood is coming from, you have some impact over the practices of that harvest.
Yeah.
If the seafood just arrives in a plastic box and you don't even know what country, you don't even know what ocean it came from,
You don't know if it's illegal or legally caught.
how is your ethic, how is your desire for sustainable seafood ever going to travel back to the point of production? So if you know where your fish is coming from, preferably if you're buying it directly from a fisherman, you, the consumer, have a lot of power in that you can communicate your desire for sustainable oceans directly to the people that are providing for your table. I think on a more general basis, when we look at the choices available to us, as you mentioned, smaller fish, bigger fish, the smaller species are generally more sustainable.
Okay.
And I say smaller species, not smaller fish. Don't go out and eat all the baby fish, please. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying eat fish that are biologically smaller. The way that I look at it is, you're familiar with a diving board. Well, diving board, think about the marine trophic scale, the food chain in the ocean is a diving board. All the way down here at the bottom, you've got the phytoplankton, the zooplankton, those little diatomaceous things that we were talking about earlier, the basis of the food chain. Next step up, you've got oysters, clams, mussels, sardines, anchovies, filter feeders, fish that swim through, or mollusks that filter the water to remove those nutrients. Next, you have your sort of second-order predators, mackerels, your small fish, snappers, your reef fish, parrotfish, things like this. And all the way at the very end, you've got tunas, sharks, marlins, these big, charismatic species that we so love. And as culinarians, chefs, that's what we want to put on the plate.
Yeah.
Big, fun species. It looks great on a plate, But if you think about the diving board, go back to this analogy, what happens if you jump at the base of a diving board?
Not much.
Nothing.
It's not going to move.
The system absorbs the shock. What happens if you jump at the very end?
We'll spring off into the pool.
You make the biggest splash you possibly can. And that's what we've been doing, is our preference for seafood has actually gone further and further out that, to the point where 100 years ago, We ate these things.
Mhm.
We ate the fish that swam towards us. Hey, if you're hungry, just wait till low tide. Go out and get some oysters.
Mhm.
But now we have global fisheries. We're able, with factory trawlers and freezer ships, to chase fish all over the globe. Large, charismatic, migratory species. And so what we've been doing in the oceans is hammering away at the part of that ecosystem which is most susceptible to
Mhm.
our impact.
Mhm.
So the further down the chain you eat, herring, sardines, anchovies, oysters, clams, mussels, the more inherently resilient the system is, and the more inherently able the system is to provide that for us.
Mhm.
And what's funny is these fish over here, they actually happen to be the healthiest fish for us. They have the highest levels of omega-3s, with selenium, magnesium, all these other nutrients that we look to fish for, in our diet. They have high levels of calcium and vitamin E, all these great things that help
Very
us as
important for our
people
health.
thrive.
Mhm.
Plus,
They just
they,
haven't been the palatable ones yet. They
Well-
haven't been the marketable ones.
yeah, because it's, it takes a little bit of work.
Mhm.
Or it's just not seen as sexy enough,
Mhm.
and I think, especially speaking to the young culinarians in the audience, that's one of the real opportunities that chefs have. We can drive popularity. We can drive trends. We put sardines on a plate in this country, and all of a sudden, oh my God, everybody wants sardines. It's cool. Why? Well, because I said so. And
As
so,
an executive chef, this is cool.
So we really have the power as consumers to drive these trends. And so, oftentimes when we think about sustainable seafood, it's all about, well, how is it produced?
Mhm.
Well, it's also about, what are the expectations
Mhm.
that drive the market that produced it for us?
Mhm.
So if we're going to the market and saying, I want more mussels and clams and oysters and sardines, well, that's what the system will then go after.
Provide. Yeah.
And so we have the opportunity to really ask of the system to provide us more inherently sustainable products.
So, Barton, you've just made a lot of really excellent points, and I want to ask you a few different questions following up on some of those points. And let's go back first to what you were saying about creating relationships with the people that you get your food from, and really knowing where your food is coming from. Is this something you've done as a chef? And can you tell us some of your personal stories about, have you made relationships with the fishermen, or where do you look for those sources of information so that you know what food you're ordering for your restaurants and then providing for your consumers and your customers?
Well, in my restaurants, we dealt very directly with the producers,
Mhm.
and very infrequently did we really use a middleman.
Okay.
And so I had 13 different fishermen who worked for my restaurants.
Wow.
And I would get text
Directly.
messages or emails and said, hey, I went out fishing today and I caught this. And I'd text back and I'd say, great, swing on by. And then I'd write my menu and, okay, there it was.
We'll serve this today.
And what that did is it allowed the fishermen the greatest profit.
Mhm.
Instead of selling the fish into a commodity market and this highly perishable product then being transferred all about and trying to find a market for it.
Mhm.
These guys went out fishing knowing I would buy it
Mhm.
and knowing that I would pay them top dollar for it.
Mhm.
And so they were able to make a better living off catching less fish. And my guests at the restaurant got a better quality product.
Yep.
I mean, they were getting fish that was 18 hours old, just fresh
Right.
out of the water, and
Right.
you
And they can feel good about those choices that they're making.
Yeah.
They know that you're providing good information and that you know where your fish is coming from, and they can trust your judgment for that when they make a decision about ordering from your menu.
Yeah, and part of that was we were selling stories.
Mhm.
And as much as our servers would go to the tables and say, well, tonight here are our specials for the day, and this is what's on offer,
Mhm.
they'd go up to the table and say, hey, our buddy Jim from the Chesapeake, he just came in today with his bluefish. Oh my God, it's so super fresh. It's fabulous. Tonight we've got it with a basil walnut pesto and a potato and zucchini cake seared up crisp on the flat top, so it's nice crunchy top to it. The bluefish been wood grilled over a smoky, sultry, smoldering fire with a little bit of apple wood in there. Woohoo!
Sounds delicious.
How can you say no to that? And so we took something, just a product, and we could have just put it on a menu. Here you go. Read the menu, decide what you want. Or we could really bring life to it, and we could really extend the purpose of eating. We could make it fun and entertaining, and so we gained so much more value from that fish because of that.
Yeah.
Guests walk out of the restaurant really feeling as though they had participated in a communion, an experience, and that they'd invested in their community.
Yeah. And so since we do have quite a few culinary students with us this evening, I'm sure this is something that they will face in their career. Do you think that those choices regarding which fish to serve and where to source your fish from, making those kind of sustainable choices, is that something that the chef should be responsible for, or the consumer? I think we probably all need to make good choices, but as a chef yourself, what do you think, where does that burden lie?
I think the burden lies throughout the chain. I think fishermen must be responsible to fish sustainably. Their jobs are on the line because of it. I think chefs have a responsibility to ask questions, if nothing else. We don't always understand what is sustainable or not sustainable. But if we ask questions, then we're at least presenting that we care. Even if you get an answer and you don't know what to do with that information, it still shows that we care, and it still demands that there be some accountability within the system. And I think one thing that consumers can really add to this is flexibility. When, as I was saying earlier with cod, in America we eat 10 species, so much more is available. And we should be willing to eat whatever the ocean provides. That when we cast a line into the ocean and we reel it back, we don't know what's coming. But I think we have a moral responsibility to eat whatever does. That if we take from the ocean, we should be willing to eat. And so that means when you walk into a restaurant, walk in with an open mind. When you walk into a retailer, simply ask, what's the best fish you have? What's the catch of the day? Just that mentality alone begins to ask the ocean what it can provide, rather than say, I need salmon.
Right. That's what we like to eat here, so that's what I would like to order.
Yes.
And that actually relates to one of our questions that we got from one of our students. Let me just see. So from Hee Ryong Kim from Sukmungyeong Women's University in Seoul. One of their questions was regarding this sort of changing of opinion, and when we just want salmon, we want salmon. How can we shift our way of thinking to be more open to these different types of fish? And so they had mentioned that we can really change people's way of thinking for environmental issues, often using ad campaigns and public relations campaigns. What other ways or methods do you suggest that we could use to change people's minds and make them more open to trying some of these other fish, maybe those that are further along, back along the diving board, that are lower on the food chain and maybe haven't always been the top choice for people to bring into their homes or to order in restaurants, but how can we start making those more exciting and more palatable, and maybe that even includes a specific recipe that you want to share?
Well, one of the great joys of culinary is that you create your own recipes. It is so personal. But I think it really does come down to the culinary creativity. That you have to put some effort into it. You can't just let the fish sell itself. You really have to sell the dish. Make it your own. Don't just put the fish out there and hope that somebody wants it. Put your passion into it. Put your creativity into it. Draw upon your experiences. A new flavor combination that you're really excited about. Pairing new ingredients. if you, the chef, are excited about it, guess what? The wait staff is going to get excited about it. Your guests are going to get excited about it. And then they're going to tell their friends about it, and they're going to get excited about
Created
it.
a trend.
And so it's really about personalizing this. If sustainability is only a narrative about the environment,
Mm-hmm.
then we're not emotionally connected to it.
Yep.
If it's about us,
Mm-hmm.
if
And
it's
our
about
health,
my
and our
story,
food.
my health,
Mhm.
if it's about these things that we hold so dear,
Mm-hmm.
then we begin to really connect
Yeah.
to it, and we begin to really
Become
open
more
up
invested.
the windows of opportunity
Yeah.
to further engage in sustainable practices.
That's great. That's great. So, one of the other points you had made earlier was also regarding economics, and I know this is something that you've been very involved in. And one of our other questions was thinking about the economics of sustainable choices. And of course, this issue will vary widely across different places across the globe. And here in the U.S., you mentioned we have a lot of different choices of what types of sustainable seafood we can choose from. One of the questions was regarding price and the price of sustainability. If we're constantly choosing a new type of fish and we're trying to expand our range of diet and put less pressure on fewer species of fish and think more broadly, how will that affect the price, and how can we make choices that are sustainable yet are affordable when the sort of pressures governing food choices in different countries across the globe will vary immensely?
Yeah. Unsustainable seafood
Mm-hmm.
is very expensive, simply because everybody wants it.
Mm-hmm.
That's why it's unsustainable.
Yeah.
A lot of these species that are currently underutilized or are undervalued
Mm-hmm.
are
Will be the cheaper.
are necessarily cheaper
Mhm.
because they're not finding their market.
Yeah.
Now, one point about that though is there aren't just tons more fish in the sea. It's not
Right.
like
We
we're
can't keep
we're
selecting
already
enough.
catching these fish.
Right.
The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization estimates that 90% of all global fisheries are fully exploited, overexploited. So we're already taking about as much fish out of the ocean as we can,
Mm-hmm.
but we're not using it as best we can.
Right. You were saying fish meal and reduction fisheries.
Precisely. And so one great example of this is the Peruvian anchoveta. This is the world's largest single species fishery. It represents 10 to 15% of the entire global catch every year. 10 to 15% of the entire catch out of one country. 98% of that fishery never feeds a human being.
Wow.
98% goes to reduction
Mm-hmm.
at 6 cents per pound US. 6 cents.
Wow.
Imagine how many people
You could feed.
you could feed. A pound of anchovies would feed 3-4 people.
Right.
The portion of protein they need for 6 cents. All right.
Yeah.
I'd be willing to pay a couple dollars for that.
Mhm.
And so it's not necessarily that if we begin to diversify demand,
Mm-hmm.
products are going to become inaccessibly
Expensive.
expensive.
Mm-hmm.
But rather what we will do is we will equalize
Yep.
the value of seafood. Because right now we have some seafood that is exorbitantly expensive
Right.
because it's in such high demand. And we have seafood that is not valuable because we're not willing to eat it.
Right.
Because it's not valuable, you have to catch so much more of it
Yeah.
in order
To make
To
it
make-
worth more money.
in order to make the payments on your boat.
Yeah.
And so simply I think that's where it's more of an opportunity than it is a danger.
Mm-hmm.
That if we diversify this demand,
Yeah.
then we actually create greater value for what we're already taking.
Mm-hmm. And it's really just shifts in the market that will create
Exactly.
more value for the fish that are actually ecologically and environmentally easier and
Yeah.
better. And I've heard this phrase often sometimes as change your fish meal into a meal of fish.
It's a good one.
One easy way to remember So let's see if we have any other questions here. One of our other questions was,
How about contamination?
sure.
We got a
If you'd
question
like
from,
to.
and forgive me, I'll try and get this pronunciation right, Yu Jung Yo from Sukmyung University. And you had written in that the ocean seemed to be getting polluted globally and affecting a lot of the seafood through contamination and toxicity. To find a substitute for these contaminated species, is there one sort of supply chain or a certain area that seems to be worse or better?
Yeah.
And this is a very difficult question because the sources of toxicity that do accumulate in fish, in beef, in pork, even in some vegetables, these are caused by global sources.
Mm-hmm.
It's really non-point source most of the time. Coal-fired power plants in India, in China, in America are producing methylmercury that ends up all over the world. Polar bears, are being found with high levels of mercury. There are no coal-fired power plants anywhere near polar bears, but it's making their way up there. Yeah. So part of one of the wonderful things about sustainability, health, and economics that we've been talking about is that the very large species that are costly to the ocean, that are costly economically, they've also been in the ocean a lot longer than these smaller species, and so they accumulate more of these toxins. So if you're doing the right thing economically by eating some of these smaller species lower on the food chain, you're doing the right thing, you're providing opportunities for fishermen, you're doing the right thing for the health, and you're doing the right thing for the environment. And so there really are, in sustainability, all these win-win-win situations that all come together. Now, that being said, from my work in public health, toxicity concerns in seafood specifically are not often seen in a cost-benefit analysis. And what I mean by that is, especially in America and in Europe, there's been a lot of studies and a lot of media coverage about methylmercury and its effect on young women, nursing and pregnant mothers. And there's been really a very negative health impact because of this. Methylmercury is bad. It has some developmental, it does have some effect on developmental progress. But the bottom line is that the omega-3s present in that seafood is actually far better for you than the mercury is bad. And there's ways to absolutely minimize your exposure to mercury by eating herring and sardines, mackerel, anchovies. But we also, when making any decision, it's important to look at the entire scope of information.
Yeah.
Because if we get so scared of methylmercury or PCBs, sometimes we deny ourselves the opportunity to gain the important health benefits that are also associated with it.
Yeah.
But also, along that sort of the diet and health thing, the most sustainable thing that we can do is eat mostly fruits, grains, greens, nuts, and vegetables. And that's one of the other trends that I really see a lot of hope in. And that's something that chefs, I think, really have a lot of power to do.
To influence people's opinions and wants and desires when they're eating out.
Well, just looking at how restaurants design their plates. You put the protein right in the center, and then the protein gets a sauce and a vegetable accompaniment. It's a very protein-centric culture, much the world over. Even if you read menus, especially in Europe and in America, you see that it starts off with the fish, halibut, in big, bold font. Artichokes and barajoule with braised carrots and a coriander cream sauce in small font. $28 in big, bold font. That as though all that matters is the protein and the price. And yet, as all of us chefs know, what makes cooking fun? It's all the things in the fine print. That's where creativity comes in. That's where, my personality is shown on the plate. That's what actually makes the dish delicious. And so I think there's a real opportunity for chefs to really reverse this trend of the protein-centric culture and to really begin to celebrate, A, what makes us as artists and as craftsmen unique, but also to really celebrate what best sustains the environment and the people in it.
Wonderful. So you've had such a varied and unique career that has touched upon economics, human health, public health, sustainable fisheries, being an executive chef. Can you tell us some more personal experiences with how you've developed a relationship with food and how you've decided to make such a focus of your career be on promoting sustainable choices? What are some experiences that have really galvanized that interest for you?
I've always been interested in food simply because when I was growing up, we had family dinner together 363 nights a year. This was where we became a family. It was around the dinner table. It was so important to us, and it was the foundation of the community that was my family. If I wanted to have dinner with my friends, well, fine. They're invited over. And
Were you usually eating the fish that you caught? Those crabs?
No, I live downtown DC most of my life, but my parents were both very good cooks. They enjoyed cooking. It was part of their it was the best part of their day. You know, they got to stop their busy lives and just slow down and touch and feel and you know, there's something very elemental about cooking and food that they really enjoyed. And so it was that fluency in food and that joy that I got from food that caused me to really explore how food integrated into my life. And I first became a chef. And as a chef, I realized that, you know, we're really dealing with a global community. And so I took off. I went to Europe and ended up bouncing around all over Europe, and I cooked in a little Michelin-starred restaurant in Spain, and then ended up in Africa by accident. I literally ended up. I got on the wrong boat. I was supposed to go to another town in Spain, and I ended up in Morocco. Oh well. And I ended up staying there for 6 months, 7 months, and got a job. I started working as a fisherman on a small little boat.
Wow.
And it was such an amazing experience for me because I'd always been fluent in food, but I'd always been fluent in the bounty of food. In my life, I had been fortunate to have always had enough food and the choice of what food to eat.
Right.
And all of a sudden, I was living in, I was working alongside, and I was part of a community that was casting their nets to catch dinner and not dollars. And I realized then that food systems, sustainability, this is a humanitarian issue. And I got involved in this and then advanced my career with National Geographic, where I've been working as an explorer, because I realized that what we are trying to sustain is not necessarily the oceans. We're trying to sustain ourselves. We are trying to create communities where children have the opportunity to get an education because they are well fed, to thrive in school, to then become thriving adults and members of their community. And that's what's at stake. But that's also the beautiful power of food, is that it enables everything that we do. And so to pay attention to food, to honor it, to genuflect to it, and to really you know, think about it, meditate on it when we are so fortunate to have it, was really the driver of my interest in this, and what's led me to really look at the human community through the lens of food, and to look at our behaviors to ensure that we continue to have food.
And that's actually very related to a question that we've just received from Port Moresby, and they're wondering about what is the connection or relationship between environmental resiliency and human health. And I might ask you to just define for us a little bit what environmental resiliency is first, and then describe its connection to human health.
Sure. Well, environmental resiliency is the ability for natural systems to operate in concert with each other, and for species to express their own biological qualities. Basically, it's the ability of cod to make more cod. It's the ability of birds to migrate through, across fields and find food along their paths. It's the ability of nature to maintain a natural state. That being said, nature is always in flux.
Yeah.
And so to think that there is a solid baseline, that nature is a static, the health of nature is a static definition, is incorrect. And when it comes to sustainability, that can sometimes be a problem.
Right.
Because we're trying to get to this one definition.
Right.
When in fact the definition's always changing.
Yeah.
So when nature is allowed to behave like nature, it is resilient.
Yeah.
When humans are allowed to have, when we have all that we need to thrive, then we are resilient. We are resilient to disease. We are resilient to economic and political stresses because the foundations of our community are built on. And so I think that environmental resiliency, leaving parts of nature whole, intact, as sort of a reserve, directly relates to human health in that it maintains the working order, the natural order by which we came to be.
And that we're so dependent on.
And that we are wholly dependent on.
Yeah. Yeah.
So is that a complicated enough answer for you? That was sort of a large, hey, cover the whole globe there. But that was a great question. Thank you.
And following up on that, a somewhat related question also from Port Moresby is almost 1/3 of the globe live, survive, and earn an income from marine resources. So what will happen if the life cycle is broken or destroyed? So if that environmental resiliency is tampered with or becomes destabilized, what will happen to us as humans? What will happen to the fish we depend upon?
Nothing pretty. It's I don't want to get into any building any scenarios, but the bottom line is people will suffer. People will suffer greatly, and I think part of sustainability is a moral responsibility we have to each other as neighbors, as global citizens, to ensure that we all are able to thrive and succeed. And so I think that's, it's an important point. To answer the question quite simply, what's going to happen if the ocean ecosystems collapse? Well, human communities will collapse. And, you can extrapolate all that means in many different ways. But when we're talking, I think it's very important to acknowledge that when we are talking about sustaining ocean ecosystems, we're about sustaining human systems that rely on them. And that there is a moral imperative to take care of each other by taking care of the oceans, by taking care of our food systems and our natural world.
And I think since we do have such a personal relationship and personal responsibility towards sustaining the oceans and making these good choices, and one of the very helpful examples I think you have from your own career is that creating relationships with the people that supply your food. It's very helpful for understanding where the food comes from and knowing that you're making good choices. And as a chef, you have a lot of opportunity to make those kind of choices and to connect with the providers of the food. And in fact, you've even had the chance to go and be a fisherman at times in your life. For people that may live in the middle of a country and are not close to the coast, or perhaps they are, but they're not going to go to top restaurants and they can expect their chef to have made these decisions for them. How are there possibilities for them to connect with the people that supply their food? What kind of questions can they ask, and how should they kind of make those efforts to become more closely connected to their food source?
I think there's great opportunity to do so by connecting to your heritage. One of the great joys in my life is cooking recipes from my grandmother, from my on both sides of my family.
Mm-hmm.
There's heritage in that. There is a connection to my past, not necessarily to the producers,
Mm-hmm.
but to where I came from,
Mm-hmm.
which is as much important as where the food that
Right.
we eat comes from. And I think by creating that connection, if you come from a culture where there's a staple diet,
Yeah.
and you celebrate that by cooking recipes that reflect that, then you are creating those pathways back to those producers. Even if you don't know them personally or interact with them,
Mm-hmm.
you're interacting with generations-old systems of connectivity
Mm-hmm.
that do bring us into direct contact with that which has always sustained that family or that
Mm-hmm.
region. And I think that's a wonderful way to participate in that.
And are those recipes that you have from your grandmother, are those very different than what we're used to seeing in today's restaurants?
Yep.
Are there more sardines and anchovies and less salmon, or what are some of the differences that you see from 2 to 3 generations ago and some of the recipes we're used to seeing today?
Well, my grandmother, both my grandparents on both sides grew up in very hard times,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a lot of utility
Mm-hmm.
in the food that you don't see in restaurants now. Where you walk in and you have 20 different proteins on a menu.
Right.
They had one protein
Mm-hmm.
that would last for multiple days,
Mm-hmm.
and so there was a lot of these recipes were really meant to, designed to get the absolute highest and best use out of every bit of food that they had.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were fun dishes. I mean, it was almost, sometimes it's like, where's Waldo? Trying to find where the pork ended up, and whether it be the baked beans of great New England tradition, where a lot of my family is from, flavored with salt pork. The day before, it was ham and farm eggs for breakfast, whatever it was. That there was a continuity to the food
Mm-hmm.
that reflected the seasons, reflected availability.
Mm-hmm.
And reflected an absolute necessity of utilization of every last bit of it.
Right. To be very resourceful and utilitarian.
Yeah. And so there was a lot less variety.
Yeah.
There was a lot more repetition of
Mm-hmm.
dishes because, well, hey, if you got dried beans, then dried beans it is.
Yeah.
And they got very creative in
Mm-hmm.
ways that they could, adding a little spice here or
Mm-hmm.
there. But it's very different than the way that most chefs these days think, because we have access to anything. And, in South Korea, if you want to get yucca root from Costa Rica, you can do that to make some fun little cassava mash or something for an interesting fusion plate. But that simply didn't exist
Mm-hmm.
in the recipes that are part of our heritage.
Right. And some of our viewers are actually wondering more about sort of your initial connections to cooking and to seafood, and it sounds like maybe your family through your dinners and also your grandmother through these recipes had a lot of connection to guiding and directing your career aspirations and path that you've taken. But they're wondering just what are some more stories about the factors or driving forces that have led you to make the choices you have in your career? Are there any other aspects that you'd like to share with our audience today?
I think I mentioned a few of them. Just the joy
Mm-hmm.
that we get from eating, the togetherness, the communion. What's the best way to win a girl's heart? Well, cook her dinner, or vice versa. Whatever. There's food brings us together. It creates relationships. It creates intimacy in ways that interactions in contemporary culture often don't allow for.
Mm-hmm. And you really developed a relationship not just to food and to your family, but also to the environment from a young age. And I think that's maybe something that we often hear as being a really central shaping force for many people that feel very connected to the environment, is having experiences at a young age, that they realize all of the interconnectedness and dependency that the environment and people and human health all have to one another. And I think that's something that's really sort of interwoven all of the different aspects of your career, as varied as it has been from economics to ocean health to public health, and being in the kitchen.
Well, it's also a sense of honor and a sense of responsibility. When I was a restaurant chef, all chefs want to put forward the best plate of food that they possibly can. You know, it's what we're trying to do. We're competing for business. We have to put forward the best plate of food. And I realized that and recognized very early on I had a responsibility to my guests to serve them safe food. I had a responsibility to them to serve them delicious food. And they were coming to my restaurant spending their very hard-earned money to come to my house, and to really enjoy themselves, to let loose, and to be entertained. I had a responsibility to sustain their health, to provide for them healthy foods that empowered them. And I began to realize that as much as I had a responsibility to my guests in order to sustain my business, I had a responsibility to the producers who were showing up at my back door. No producers, no food. No food, no restaurant. No restaurant, no guests. And so there was a real sense of continuity, of continuum that I developed and very early on. And that's what I got, I think, really interested in sustainability. And one of the key principles of sustainability for me is that we're not just trying to sustain the oceans. We're trying to sustain also the people who work on the oceans to provide food for our tables. And I think we owe equal responsibility. I mean, this is a noble profession, fishing. And all too often, I think fishermen get blamed. You know, if overfishing is the problem, well, duh, underfishing is the solution. No, that's not really the way it is. Better fishing is the solution. Better use of the fish that they catch is the solution. So I think it's very important that we
be cognizant of those management measures we can take and those decisions and awareness that we can all have as consumers or providers, any step in that chain.
But also a responsibility of men and women that, you know, sail the water and sail the oceans at great danger to I think, very nobly provide food for our tables. We owe them a great debt of honor. And so I think that they're as much a part of what we're trying to sustain as anything else.
And this is also somewhat related to a question we just got from Korea. While you felt it was a very great honor to be able to provide these different meals for people that were coming to your restaurant, to choose your restaurant, and you would provide for them, did you have a favorite sustainable seafood dish that you would prepare?
Oh, jeez. The question.
We won't make you give away all the secrets of your recipe. The question of all questions.
But I really like oysters. Oysters are my favorite thing in the world. Cold, raw oyster, briny, sweet, shucked as though the top shell just magically flew off, and here's this living, breathing, almost quivering little delicious thing sitting in its shell just waiting for you to slurp it down, and it's so pure, and it's like the ocean punching you in the face, and it's so brilliant. It's such a wonderful experience, and it's an experience that is so inherently rooted to a place. I mean, how often do you actually get to taste a place? You don't go to a farm and pick up a handful of dirt, but we go to the ocean and pick up a handful of oysters. Wow, that's pretty cool. I mean, that's always been my favorite thing because it is so evocative, and it is so
connected and reminiscent of exactly where it's come from, and the environment that it's exactly been pulled out of.
Yeah. And,
great. Oysters.
Yeah.
Oysters it is.
I actually think it's our patriotic duty to eat as many farm-raised oysters as we possibly can. It's the only thing I recommend outright overconsumption of. It's farm-raised shellfish. I think it's not sustainable seafood. It's actually restorative seafood in that it adds to the quality of the environment. It adds to the quality of life for those people who work upon those waters. And it adds to the quality of your life, too. Certainly adds to the quality of my life.
And if you're a proponent of serving raw oysters, it sounds like it's also a very easy dish to prepare. You don't have to do much for
And-
that.
An oyster must be shucked right. There's two ways to shuck an oyster: the right way and the wrong way. There's nothing in between. So
We
yeah.
would have to come here for a demonstration, though.
Yeah,
at
anytime.
Some point in the future. So we'll just close with one last question from Port Moresby. And this really kind of wraps up a lot of the different elements we've discussed here today. But since we have the unique opportunity to have you here as an executive chef and a real champion for sustainable oceans, how will our choices for diet and menus help to restore our relationship with the ocean, the land, and with each other?
Oh.
That's a real philosophical
It
question.
is, and it's. I think we find our place in the systems of this world in our quest for food. The way we eat describes how this world is used. The way we eat describes how we are able to thrive. And the way that we eat describes how we define ourselves as neighbors within a global community. And I think how we eat describes how we feel about and respect all of those who share this big, beautiful, and mostly blue planet with us. And I think it's both a responsibility, it's an honor, and luckily it's delicious.
That's a great answer. Thank you, Barton. Well, with that, we'll wrap it up, and we hope that everyone who tuned in today found this very educational and informative. I know I did. And just a reminder that today's session was recorded, and it will be distributed in the next couple of days for public viewing online. So with that, thank you again, Barton, and thank you to all of you who tuned in.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining.
Good morning and good evening.
Take care.
Yay. Yay.
Well done.
Sorry, I totally didn't have any questions at one point there in the middle. Like,
Yeah,
oh
that's what I was
gosh, we've
like,
gone
okay,
through all of
I'm-
them. I'm very sorry about that.
That was a really great flow.
Also quite tired.
Hey, and to the other newscaster, like, yeah, we have another story.
And back to the field. Oh, bye, Korea.
Bye. Best of luck in the cooking.
You see them waving back?
They have your face on a poster.
I
right?
saw.